Energy crises are one of the biggest problems that can be observed in every corner of the world with inadequate supply relative to higher demand. African, Asian, and South American countries are the biggest victims of these energy crises, as they lack sufficient energy resources within their own territories or a strong economy to import energy from foreign nations. If I were to tell you that Nigeria is also on the list, you might wonder how that could be, as this West African nation is the biggest oil producer in Africa. In the global rankings, Nigeria is considered to have the 7th biggest oil reserves in the world. When we examine countries that are in an energy crisis, all of them are mostly without strong energy sources. How then did this fuel-rich nation find itself in an energy crisis? Through this video, we're going to answer that question. Before we proceed, hit the subscribe button and smash the bell icon for more exciting updates. When we talk about African countries like Nigeria, you might think it's just another poor African nation. But can you imagine it as the largest economy in Africa? Yes, it's the largest economy in Africa and the 31st largest economy in the world in terms of nominal GDP. However, there is massive inequality in the distribution of wealth in this African nation, as wealth is concentrated around Lagos, south of the country, and the northern region of the country is dealing with extreme poverty. The 5 richest men in the country are responsible for a total wealth of $29.9 billion in total, while the other millions of people are well below the extreme poverty line. The backbone of the Nigerian economy is oil and gas production, which are responsible for more than 90% of the country's total foreign revenue. Within the last few decades, the Nigerian economy has significantly transformed from an agricultural-based one to a manufacturing and service-based one. More than 52% of Nigeria's GDP comes from the manufacturing and services sector, and for that reason, electricity has become one of the country's most essential requirements. The government has failed to provide an adequate supply of electricity to household consumers, as well as large industries. According to current statistics, only 45% of people are connected to the national electricity supply, and the government is still unable to provide continuous electricity supply to those who have it. If we explain the severity of this energy crisis in numbers, Nigerians using electricity experience electrical breakdowns 85% of the time, and the supply is totally non-existent in some regions. When running with optimum capacity, the average supply of electricity is limited to up to 4 hours. Even when electricity is available, there is no proper announcement related to power cuts or restoration. Now, Nigeria is undergoing rapid economic development, and many industries are established all over this African state for that reason, increasing the demand for electricity day by day, as energy plays a big role in every industrial sector. This energy crisis is not something new that began 2 or 3 years back, but goes back a few decades. So the causes are varied and complex, combining everything in a way that is difficult to resolve. The beginning of electric power generation in Nigeria dates back to the 19th century with the installation of 2 power generators in the colony of Lagos. At that time, only a very limited number of countries were able to generate electric power. The Electric Corporation of Nigeria was established through a parliamentary act under the British Empire in 1951. However, Nigerians had limited freedom to make decisions regarding their power generation activities until the United Kingdom granted freedom to this West African nation in 1960. Even though Nigeria is rich with crude oil, coal, and natural gases, its main focus for electricity generation was hydropower. To enhance hydropower production within the country, the Niger Dams Authority was established in 1962. Both the Electricity Corporation of Nigeria and Niger Dams Authority were merged to a single governmental body in 1972, establishing the National Electric Power Authority. Even though different regimes rebranded the responsible authorities with different names, none of the regimes were successful in introducing a clear policy regarding the enhancement of electric power generation to match the rising demand. As we mentioned earlier, only 45% of people have access to the national grid, and 55% of the country is still in the dark, depending on the alternative power sources. At a peak point of its power generation failure, the Nigerian government decided to privatize the generators and power distribution assets, and also invited the private sector to invest more into the country's energy sector. However, the Nigerian government kept the transmission rights of the national grid to decide where and when the generated electric power is transmitted. Although the Nigerian government had high hopes for the privatization of the energy sector, the West African nation experienced little development in the electricity generation sector with relatively low foreign investments. You may wonder, why would Nigeria focus on hydropower production despite being the largest oil producer on the African continent? Even though it tops oil production lists, Nigeria doesn't possess sufficient refinery facilities to convert its crude oil to a usable state. Actually, Nigeria has 4 state-owned refineries which are not currently at an operational level. They discovered their main oil deposits in the Niger Delta in the 1950s, and after 70 years since that discovery, it's a total joke not to have at least one refinery to meet the country's oil demand. So they export the crude oil to foreign nations and import back the refined oil at a high cost. The oil price is extremely high in the oil-rich West African nation, and it isn't possible to use fossil fuels for power generation for that reason. In order to power their factories using private generators, industrial firms must bear extra expenses, and this is one of the reasons foreign investment has moved out of the country. As we mentioned earlier, a considerable portion of the population deals with extreme poverty, and they have no means to attain the service of private generators all the time. In 2012, Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, had a production capacity of just 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts to meet the electricity demand of a population of around 150 million. During the same period, South Africa, which is the second largest economy in Africa, generated more than 40,000 megawatts of electricity to meet the demand of a population of around 62 million. This huge gap clearly shows Nigeria's inadequate power generation. Nigerians had no faith in the power supply from the national grid, and the majority of people started to depend on their own private generators. So, more than 96% of electricity generation within Nigeria was carried out using off-grid private generation as of 2012. Between 2012 and 2022, the Nigerian government was successful in adding 22,000 megawatts to the generation capacity of the national grid. In parallel to the rise in power generation, the Nigerian population has also risen to an all-time high of 220 million, increasing the electricity demand of the country. Unfortunately, the Nigerian government still fails to transmit all the electricity generated to houses and factories due to issues in their national grid. This has become a severe issue that needs to be addressed quickly, as the Nigerian government already has plans to add an extra 6,000 megawatts of power to the national grid. However, there is no point in adding that extra power if the distribution companies lack the facilities to deliver all power produced to the Nigerian people. According to a statement made by the Minister of Power, Eng Abubakar Aliyu, now the Nigerian government is working closely with the German government to solve the issues in their production and transmission process. Nigeria will receive a loan of around $2 million from the German government to raise generation capacity in 3 stages. Siemens Energy has already signed a contract with the Nigerian government to execute this project, and they will increase the power generation by 7,000 megawatts to 11,000 megawatts, and from there to 25,000 megawatts. If this project is successful, the Nigerian government will be successful in achieving some kind of balance between its supply and demand. However, they have many issues to solve in this entire process, as only 45% of the total population is connected to the country's national grid. At the same time, there is a huge inequality in the distribution of power, and the southern part of the country, where more money is circulating, is benefiting most from power production.